The courthouse lobby was quiet enough to hear the click of polished shoes against marble. Terry Wallace didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. In the end, he said, adjusting his cufflinks as reporters hovered nearby, "Nora was never involved in the company. She was just my wife." The investors standing behind him nodded politely. A few even smiled. Nora Long stood 3 feet away, holding a thin folder against her chest. She did not correct him. She did not look at him. Inside that folder were signatures that built the billion-dollar deal he was celebrating. Terry believed he was walking away with everything. He had no idea what was about to be documented. If you believe silence does not mean weakness, stay with this story until the very end. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from, and your local time justice travels across time zones. And if you value truth that unfolds slowly but precisely, consider subscribing. Some stories don't shout. They prove. Nora Long had never needed to be the loudest person in the room. Silence, when disciplined, revealed more than questions ever could. Long before Terry Wallace became a headline before the interviews, and tailored suits, and polished confidence, there had been a 1-bedroom apartment in Somerville just outside Boston. The windows rattled in winter. The radiator hissed unevenly. The startup existed only as a name typed into a Delaware registration form at 1:17 a.m. Nora had filed it. Terry liked to say he built his company from nothing. It was almost true. What he built from nothing was the idea. What Nora built from nothing was the structure that allowed it to survive. She had a degree in regulatory compliance and contract administration from Northeastern University. Not glamorous, not disruptive, but durable. She understood how systems held together, and more importantly, how they collapsed when neglected. In those early months, while Terry designed pitch decks and rehearsed visionary language in front of the bathroom mirror, Nora sat at the kitchen table with a laptop balanced on an overturned storage bin. She researched state filing requirements. She drafted vendor agreements. She corrected tax classifications that could have triggered penalties. She opened the company's first operating account and insisted on dual authorization controls, though Terry had laughed and said, "We don't even have money yet." They did not have money. What they had was a maxed-out credit card and Nora's meticulous spreadsheets forecasting how long they could survive without revenue. When the first contractor threatened legal action over a delayed payment, Terry panicked. Nora reviewed the agreement, found a misapplied clause, and negotiated a structured settlement over email in measured, polite sentences that never once escalated. The contractor backed down. The relationship continued. Terry called it a lucky save. Nora logged the correspondence into a folder labeled Vendor Risk, 2014. She logged everything. Even then, she kept parallel records, not because she mistrusted Terry, but because she understood memory could be unreliable under pressure. Her notebooks were dated. Her digital files time-stamped. Emails archived twice, once on the company server, once on an encrypted external drive she purchased with her own savings. Terry admired her efficiency in those days. He would kiss the top of her head and say, "I couldn't do this without you." It was the word "this" that would later change. When their first angel investor wired $250,000, Terry cried in the hallway outside the bank. Nora did not. She asked for the wire confirmation number and updated the capitalization table that same afternoon. She explained dilution percentages to Terry using colored cells in Excel. She drafted the board consent approving the issuance of shares. Her name did not appear on the cap table. It did not need to. At least, that was what she told herself. They were married. They were building something together. Ownership in the emotional sense felt implied. The company grew, slowly, then quickly. Terry learned how to command a room. He developed the habit of leaning forward when speaking to investors, lowering his voice slightly as if confiding in them. He mastered narrative arcs, problem disruption scale. Nora mastered payroll software. When their second funding round nearly collapsed because of discrepancies in expense classification, it was Nora who reconciled 12 months of transactions over a weekend. She found the miscategorized entries. She corrected the ledger. She drafted a memo explaining the adjustments before the auditors could ask. The round closed on Monday. Terry thanked the CFO publicly. Privately, he told Nora, "You're my secret weapon." It was meant as praise, but a secret by definition remains unseen. As the company expanded into a larger office in downtown Boston, Nora transitioned from the kitchen table to a glass-walled conference room. She did not demand a title. She did not require a salary increase. She structured internal controls, wrote compliance protocols, and created document retention policies that would later become crucial during acquisition talks. She attended board meetings, though often seated slightly behind Terry. At first, he introduced her as my wife Nora. She helps with operations. Later, it became simply Nora. Eventually, he stopped introducing her at all. The shift was gradual enough to appear accidental. Language changed first. "This is our company," Terry used to say. "Then the company needs. Then my company." The difference was subtle. Nora heard it each time. She did not correct him. Instead, she increased her documentation. She began adding short internal memos summarizing major decisions. She saved draft versions of contracts before revisions. She archived board minutes, both before and after edits. She did not anticipate betrayal. She anticipated complexity. Success complicates people. By their 8th year of marriage, Terry's calendar was saturated. Investor dinners, media appearances, strategy offsites in Napa. His suits became sharper, his watch more expensive. Interviews described him as self-made. Nora read each article carefully. She clipped none of them. She noticed the pattern of omission. When a profile in a national business magazine described Terry as the architect behind every operational safeguard, she paused. The journalist had likely never met her. Terry never corrected the record. At home, the distance widened in increments too small for arguments. Terry traveled more frequently. Phone calls were shorter. When Nora asked about hiring additional compliance staff, he said, "We're scaling. Don't slow us down with red tape." Red tape. The phrase lingered. The same safeguards he once relied upon were now obstacles in his narrative of agility. Still, when the company faced a regulatory inquiry from a state agency over data handling practices, it was Nora who drafted the response letter. Calm, precise, supported by attachments. The inquiry closed without penalty. Terry celebrated with champagne. He did not mention who wrote the letter. Nora did not require applause. What she required was accuracy. That was why she kept the external drive in a locked drawer of her desk. Why she labeled files with dates rather than emotional descriptors. Why she forwarded certain key emails to a secondary account she alone controlled. Not because she expected collapse, but because she understood that structures fail most often at their highest points of stress. The first time Terry excluded her from a strategy meeting entirely, it happened under the guise of efficiency. "It's just high-level vision stuff," he said. "You'd be bored," Nora nodded. Later that evening, she requested the meeting notes. She received a summarized version, stripped of details. She compared it to calendar invitations and cross-referenced timestamps with internal chat logs. The omissions were small, but they existed. The narrator knows what Nora did not yet articulate aloud. She sensed the ground shifting beneath language long before it shifted beneath law. Terry did not wake up one morning intending to erase her. He simply grew accustomed to applause that did not require attribution. In the quiet of their home office one night, long after Terry had fallen asleep, Nora opened her laptop and reviewed the company's historical filings. Her digital fingerprints were everywhere. Authorized signatory on early bank accounts, incorporation amendments she had drafted, board consents she had formatted and stored. She traced the timeline with a cursor moving slowly down the screen. 10 years of structure, 10 years of signatures, 10 years of invisible architecture. She closed the laptop gently. She was not angry. Not yet. But she understood something with absolute clarity. If the story were ever rewritten, it would not be because she failed to keep records. And Terry, standing years later in a courthouse lobby claiming she had never been involved, had no idea how complete those records truly were. Success rarely arrives with a warning. It arrives disguised as validation. By the 9th year of the company's existence, Wallace Analytics Terry had insisted on attaching his surname early on. Occupied 2 full floors of a glass building overlooking the Charles River. The logo gleamed in brushed steel near reception. Investors walked in with admiration already formed. Inside the executive suite, however, memory was shorter than Nora Long expected. She had once held the title Director of Operations, though the designation had never been formalized in press materials. She signed vendor contracts. She structured internal compliance matrices. She managed risk registers before the company was large enough to fear them. When the first near collapse happened, it did not make headlines. It was year 3. Revenue projections had been optimistic. A major client delayed payment for 90 days, citing internal restructuring. Payroll loomed. Vendors tightened terms. The company's line of credit, modest and fragile, hovered near its limit. Terry had paced the apartment kitchen, hands in his hair. "We just need time," he had said. "Time in business is purchased." Nora had walked into their small bank branch the next morning with a folder and a composed expression. She met with a lending officer and presented a revised cash flow projection she had prepared overnight. She explained the client's creditworthiness, attached correspondence, outlined mitigation steps. The officer hesitated, so Nora signed a personal guarantee. She did not dramatize it. She did not announce it at dinner. She updated her spreadsheet and returned to reconciling accounts. The extended credit carried the company through that quarter. When the delayed payment finally arrived, Terry toasted resilience. He never mentioned the personal risks she had absorbed. Nora did not remind him. The narrator knows this. She was not naive. She understood liability. She simply believed partnership implied shared consequence. As the company matured, new faces entered the orbit. Daniel Brooks joined as Chief Financial Officer in year 5. He was careful, analytical, and quietly observant. He noticed quickly that many of the internal control systems bore Nora's formatting style, clean, consistent, structured. During his first week, he had asked Terry who built this compliance framework. Terry had replied casually. "We all pitched in early on." Daniel had glanced toward Nora's office, where she was reviewing an insurance rider. He understood more than Terry intended to say. Laura Chen arrived 2 years later as general counsel. She had experience in mid-market acquisitions and carried herself with measured authority. On her first day, she requested historical board minutes. Nora delivered a complete archive within 20 minutes. Digitally indexed, cross-referenced, versioned. Laura paused while reviewing the earliest documents. "You drafted these?" she asked. "Yes," Nora answered simply. Laura nodded once. Respect formed in silence. Public perception, however, shaped itself differently. Terry learned how to perform confidence under studio lights. He accepted invitations to speak on panels about innovation and leadership. His language sharpened into something aspirational. "We moved fast," he would say. "We trusted our instincts." He rarely mentioned structure. In one nationally syndicated interview, when asked how he managed risk during rapid growth, Terry laughed lightly. "You can't be afraid to break things." Nora watched that interview alone in their living room. The phrase echoed against memory. She remembered the regulatory inquiry in year 6, when a state data privacy office questioned Wallace Analytics' storage practices. It had not been a small matter. Fines could have reached 7 figures. Reputation damage even higher. Terry had been traveling when the inquiry arrived. Nora had drafted the response letter. She cited statutory language precisely. She attached procedural evidence. She proposed a voluntary audit adjustment to demonstrate good faith. She scheduled a conference call and answered technical questions without raising her voice. The inquiry closed without penalty. No press release followed. Inside the company, Terry thanked the legal team. Laura Chen knew better. Daniel Brooks knew better. They did not contradict him. Success accelerates narrative simplification. As revenue climbed and private equity interest grew, Terry's calendar thickened with strategic retreats and investor dinners. Nora's days grew longer as well, though her meetings shifted inward: compliance reviews, insurance renewals, policy updates, documentation protocols for scale. She created redundancy in file storage. She updated signature authorization cards at the bank when new accounts were opened. Her name remained on several as an original authorized signatory. It had been practical at the time. Terry traveled frequently. Someone needed authority to execute urgent transfers or sign filings. No one thought to remove her. Not yet. The shift began subtly. At board meetings, Nora noticed agendas circulating that did not include her in early drafts. She received finalized versions hours before convening. Strategic discussions occurred in side conversations before formal votes. When she asked Daniel for updated cap table models, he hesitated slightly. "Those are being handled directly through Terry now," he said carefully. "Handled. Language narrowing access." Nora did not object publicly. She requested read-only access instead. She archived what she received. One evening, she reviewed the company's capitalization structure line by line. Early equity issuances bore timestamps she remembered personally. She had prepared the documentation. She had circulated subscription agreements. She had stored executed copies. Her name did not appear as a shareholder, but her email address appeared in every thread coordinating issuance. Digital fingerprints do not disappear easily. Terry's transformation was not cruel at first. It was incremental. Praise redirected inward. Decision-making centralized. Transparency thinned. At home, the conversations shortened. "You worry too much about controls," he told her once, loosening his tie after a fundraising dinner. "We're not a startup anymore." Structure to him began to resemble constraint. To Nora, it remained survival. In year 8, a mid-level operations manager attempted to bypass established approval processes for vendor contracts. Nora flagged the deviation and required correction. The manager complained to Terry. He called Nora into his office. "We need to empower people," he said. "You can't hold everything so tight." Nora listened without defensiveness. "I'm holding the company's exposure," she replied quietly. He sighed. Exposure to Terry meant market risk. To Nora, it meant legal vulnerability. The difference would later matter. As rumors of a major acquisition began circulating within industry circles, interest in Wallace Analytics intensified. Investment bankers requested preliminary data rooms. Financial advisors evaluated scale potential. Nora assembled documentation in anticipation, though no formal mandate had yet been given. She created a due diligence checklist. She began verifying that intellectual property assignments from early contractors had been properly executed. Some required updates. She initiated outreach. She did not announce these efforts. She had learned that preparation did not always receive acknowledgement, but it prevented crisis. One night, reviewing old email archives, she came across a message from Terry dated nearly a decade earlier. Subject: "Couldn't do this without you." The body was brief. Gratitude expressed plainly. No performance, no audience. Nora closed the message without nostalgia. Memory she understood could not substitute for documentation. The narrator knows something Terry does not yet perceive. The systems Nora built were not ornamental. They were structural beams embedded in walls he believed he alone had raised. When the company's valuation crossed into the hundreds of millions, Terry began speaking in terms of legacy. "My vision," he told a journalist. "My execution." He had begun believing the simplified version of events. Nora did not attempt to correct him in interviews. She corrected filings. She maintained her encrypted external drive. She updated passwords. She created a chronological index titled Foundational Contributions, not for confrontation, for clarity. In quiet moments, she felt neither rage nor fear, only awareness. Awareness that partnership unacknowledged does not cease to exist. It becomes evidence. And somewhere in conference rooms filled with polished optimism, negotiations were beginning that would eventually hinge on documentation far older than the narrative Terry was constructing. He believed momentum would carry him forward. Nora understood that foundations decide who remains standing when pressure increases. The first official outreach from Redcrest Capital Partners arrived on a Tuesday morning at 8:42 a.m. It came in the form of a formal email addressed to Terry Wallace, subject line. Precise and understated strategic acquisition inquiry. Confidential. Terry read it twice before forwarding it to Daniel Brooks and Laura Chen. He did not initially forward it to Nora. She learned about Redcrest an hour later when Daniel stepped into her office holding a printed copy of the email, his expression carefully neutral. "You'll want to see this," he said. Nora read the message slowly. Redcrest Capital Partners, a New York-based private equity firm known for scaling mid-market technology firms into billion-dollar exits, had expressed interest in acquiring a controlling stake in Wallace Analytics. The valuation range indicated in the email began with a number that made most founders dizzy: $1 billion. Nora did not react outwardly. "Due diligence will be intense," she said simply. Daniel nodded. "It always is." By noon, Terry had scheduled a call with Redcrest's managing director, Stephen Caldwell. His voice carried a sharper edge that day, contained excitement disguised as composure. "This is what we've been building toward," he told Nora that evening, pacing the living room. "This is validation. Validation." Nora had learned that word often preceded acceleration. The formal process began 2 weeks later. Redcrest's due diligence team delivered a 73-page request list. It covered every operational dimension: audited financials, tax filings, intellectual property assignments, employment agreements, regulatory compliance history, insurance policies, banking covenants, board resolutions, capitalization records. Terry glanced at the list and handed it to Laura. Laura scanned it and then looked toward Nora. "This will require full historical documentation," she said. Nora had already begun preparing. The data room was built within 48 hours. Every document was labeled with consistent naming conventions: year_month_category_version. Each file cross-referenced to corresponding board minutes or authorization records. Historical vendor contracts were grouped by risk classification. Insurance renewals were annotated with coverage changes. Redcrest's associate leading document review sent a brief email 3 days later. "Impressive archival structure." Terry forwarded the compliment to the executive team with a celebratory note. He did not mention Nora. Interviews began shortly thereafter. Terry appeared on CNBC to discuss strategic opportunities in data analytics. He wore a navy suit with a subtle windowpane pattern and spoke confidently about scaling vision and leadership resilience. "We built this company by moving fast," he said into the camera. "We weren't afraid to take bold risks." Nora watched from her office desk. Bold risks. She remembered renegotiating vendor indemnity clauses at midnight to prevent litigation exposure. She remembered revising privacy policies to align with evolving state regulations before enforcement deadlines passed. She remembered restructuring payment schedules when cash flow tightened unexpectedly. Boldness had always been balanced by caution. Redcrest's due diligence deepened. Requests became more granular. Provide original executed intellectual property assignments from early contractors. Confirm authorized signatories on all banking accounts since inception. Produce board resolutions approving issuance of stock options between years 2 and 4. Nora retrieved documents from archives most employees did not know existed. In reviewing early contractor agreements, she discovered 2 IP assignment forms that had never been countersigned properly. She contacted the former contractors discreetly and secured corrected signatures within 72 hours. She did not inform Terry of the oversight. She informed Laura Chen. Laura's eyes lingered on Nora for a moment longer than usual. Without that correction, Redcrest would have flagged ownership gaps, Laura said quietly. Nora nodded. Ownership gaps become leverage. The phrase hung between them. At the annual industry gala in Chicago that autumn, Terry stood on stage receiving an innovation award. The ballroom glowed with soft gold lighting. Investors filled the front rows. Redcrest representatives occupied a table near the stage. When Terry began his acceptance speech, he thanked his executive team by name. Daniel, Laura, even the head of marketing. Nora sat at a round table near the back. He did not mention her. Afterward, during the reception, a Redcrest associate approached Terry with congratulations. Nora stood beside him. "This must be your wife," the associate said politely. Terry smiled. "Yes, Nora." He did not add a title. The associate turned to Nora. "You must be proud." "I am careful," she replied. The associate laughed, assuming modesty. Nora did not correct him. Later that night, back in the hotel suite, Terry seemed energized. "They're serious," he said, loosening his tie. "This could close within 6 months." Nora sat at the desk reviewing a revised indemnification clause Redcrest's legal team had proposed. 6 months is aggressive, she said calmly. "There are structural items that require verification." Terry waved his hand dismissively. "They won't derail a billion-dollar deal over paperwork." Paperwork. Nora did not argue. She made a note in her notebook. Closing timeline projected at 6 months. Verify spousal consent requirements. Because she knew something Terry appeared to overlook. Several early bank accounts still listed her as an authorized signatory. The company's first credit extension, the one backed by her personal guarantee, remained documented in archived lending agreements. Certain corporate resolutions from the early years bore her signature as corporate secretary, an informal title Terry had once assigned when they could not afford additional officers. Redcrest's due diligence team requested confirmation of spousal consent for transfer of controlling shares. It was standard in closely held companies, where marital property laws could complicate ownership transfer. Terry forwarded the request to Michael Harrington, the external corporate attorney recently engaged to manage acquisition negotiations. Michael replied quickly, "We'll handle that internally. Should be routine." Routine. Nora read the email thread without comment. That evening, Terry mentioned it casually. "There'll be some paperwork for you to sign. Standard stuff. Just acknowledging you don't have a claim to shares." Nora looked at him. "I don't," she asked, her voice level. He paused only a fraction of a second. "Not officially," he said. "It's cleaner this way. Cleaner." Nora returned her gaze to the document in front of her. Clean narratives often require selective memory. Redcrest's compliance team scheduled a video conference to discuss governance history. Present were Stephen Caldwell. 2 analysts, Laura Chen, Daniel Brooks, Terry, and Nora, included at Laura's insistence. Questions were methodical. "Who structured your initial compliance framework?" one analyst asked. Terry began to answer. "We all collaborated early on." Laura glanced briefly toward Nora. Nora spoke evenly. "I drafted the original compliance matrix and implemented version control protocols in year 1. The current system is an extension of that framework." Silence followed for a beat. Stephen Caldwell made a note. The analyst nodded. "Thank you," he said. Terry's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. After the call ended, he closed his office door. "You don't need to jump in on every answer," he said. "They asked," Nora replied. He exhaled sharply. "This is delicate. Investors need clarity. Clarity requires accuracy," she said. He did not respond. That night, Nora updated her encrypted archive. She added a new folder labeled Redcrest Acquisition Governance. She saved copies of every request list, every response, every revised contract draft. every email referencing spousal consent. Not because she anticipated conflict, because acquisition magnifies scrutiny. The narrator understands what Terry does not yet see in transactions of this magnitude. History resurfaces. And history, when documented thoroughly, does not bend easily to convenience. As Redcrest's interest intensified and valuation discussions edged toward final numbers, Terry felt momentum pulling him forward. Nora felt pressure gathering quietly beneath the surface. Both were correct. But only one of them was recording every shift in language, every alteration in structure, every assumption made about ownership. The billion-dollar deal was no longer hypothetical, and neither was the significance of signatures written years earlier at a kitchen table no one remembered. The word routine appeared 3 times in Michael Harrington's email. Routine spousal consent. Routine post-nuptial clarification. Routine protection ahead of closing. Nora Long had spent a decade dismantling the word routine inside corporate language. Nothing that involved ownership liability or transfer of control was routine. Not at scale, not at a billion-dollar valuation. The draft documents arrived via secure portal late on a Thursday evening. Terry forwarded the link with a short message. "We should get this signed quickly. Redcrest wants clean structure before final valuation confirmation." Nora opened the files without comment. The first document was labeled Post-Nuptial Agreement. Confidential. She read every page. The language was polished, professionally constructed, framed as asset clarification in anticipation of liquidity events. It described Wallace Analytics as Terry's separate property. It stated that Nora waived any current or future claim to ownership interest voting rights, profit participation, or proceeds from sale beyond marital property distribution, as determined by equitable division. Equitable division. The phrase depended on state law. It depended on disclosure. It depended on timing. The draft contained a clause stating that Nora acknowledged she had not contributed materially to the creation or growth of the company in a manner that would constitute ownership. She read that sentence twice. Then she scrolled to the final pages. Signature lines. Hers blank. Terry entered the home office as she finished reviewing the document. "It's straightforward," he said, leaning against the door frame. "Michael says it's standard before acquisitions. Investors don't want complications." Nora closed the document, but did not close her laptop. "Did Michael review the early bank guarantees?" she asked. Terry frowned slightly. "What guarantees the personal guarantee I signed for the line of credit in year 3? "That was temporary," he replied quickly. "It doesn't make you an owner." Nora did not argue the legal interpretation. She asked another question. "Did he review the corporate resolutions from the first 2 years where I signed as secretary? That was informal." Terry said, his tone sharpening. "We didn't even have titles then." "Informal roles still carry documentation," she said calmly. He stepped into the room. "Why are you making this complicated? I built the company." Nora looked at him evenly. "You built the vision," she replied. He stared at her for a long moment. "Are you refusing to sign?" he asked. "I'm requesting independent counsel," she answered. The silence that followed was not loud. It was controlled. "You don't trust me?" Terry asked the question framed as injury. "Trust doesn't replace review," Nora said. The shift in his expression was subtle but unmistakable. Frustration edged into irritation. "This is exactly what I mean," he said. "You see risk everywhere." She did not correct him. She saw documentation. The next morning, she requested copies of all historical loan agreements directly from the bank's archival department. As an original authorized signatory, she still had access rights to retrieve documents upon formal identification. She downloaded transaction histories for the first 5 years of operation. She cross-referenced deposits and transfers with her archived spreadsheets. Patterns emerged. Capital injections during tight quarters. Reallocations executed under her authorization when Terry was traveling. Short-term internal loans she'd extended from personal savings and later reimbursed. Each transaction bore digital evidence. She organized them chronologically. Meanwhile, Terry accelerated acquisition discussions. Redcrest's legal team requested confirmation of no outstanding marital claims that could encumber transfer of controlling shares. Michael Harrington replied that spousal consent documentation was in progress. In progress. Terry began staying later at the office. Phone calls lengthened behind closed doors. At a private dinner with Redcrest executives in Manhattan, he spoke confidently about streamlined governance. There are no complications, he assured them. My ownership structure is clean. He believed it. Back home, Nora opened a new folder within her encrypted archive, Marital Property, Corporate Nexus. She scanned the post-nuptial draft and annotated it with digital comments. She highlighted inconsistencies. She marked clauses requiring full financial disclosure prior to waiver. She printed nothing. Paper could disappear. Digital copies properly duplicated did not. 3 days later, she scheduled a consultation with a family law attorney in Boston. She did not announce the appointment. The attorney's name was Avery Cole. Avery's office was understated neutral walls, no decorative excess. She listened more than she spoke. When Nora finished summarizing the situation, Avery asked a single question. "Do you have documentation of your contributions?" Nora placed a slim external drive on the desk. "Yes," she said. Avery did not smile. "Good." They discussed state marital property laws, equitable distribution standards, and the impact of pending acquisitions on asset division. Avery explained that signing a post-nuptial agreement under conditions of incomplete disclosure could later be contested, but prevention was stronger than litigation. "Has your husband filed for divorce?" Avery asked. "No," Nora replied. "But the timing of this document suggests anticipation of separation," Avery observed. Nora did not respond. She did not need to. Back at Wallace Analytics, Michael Harrington circulated a revised spousal consent form, separate from the post-nuptial draft. This document was narrower. It acknowledged that Nora had no direct ownership interest in the shares being transferred. Nora compared it to early incorporation records. Her name did not appear on the share register. But her email correspondence demonstrated direct involvement in structuring early equity issuances. She requested a full copy of the current cap table from Daniel Brooks. Daniel hesitated. "Terry prefers that I route these through him now," he said carefully. "As original corporate secretary, I require access for review," Nora replied. Daniel exhaled slowly. He forwarded the file. The cap table showed dilution across multiple funding rounds. Terry retained majority control. Investors held preferred shares. Executive options were listed. Nora's name did not appear. But footnotes referenced early governance roles she had fulfilled before formal titles were established. Footnotes, often overlooked. She saved the document. Later that week, during a strategy meeting regarding closing timeline, Terry outlined steps toward final signing ceremony in New York. "We'll finalize governance cleanup, secure spousal consent, and proceed to escrow," he said confidently. Nora sat quietly at the end of the table. Laura Chen glanced at her briefly. After the meeting, Laura approached her privately. "Are you comfortable with the consent structure?" Laura asked carefully. "Comfort requires full disclosure," Nora replied. Laura nodded. There was something in Laura's expression that suggested awareness of fault lines forming. At home that evening, Terry attempted a different approach. "This isn't personal," he said softer now. "It's business." Nora met his gaze. "Business is documented," she answered. He leaned back in his chair. "You're acting like you think I'm trying to cheat you." She did not accuse. She did not defend. "I'm acting like I understand timing," she said. The word lingered between them. Because timing was not neutral. The acquisition was scheduled to close within 6 months. Spousal consent was required before final share transfer. Post-nuptial waiver eliminated potential claims before valuation was publicly confirmed. And Terry had begun referring to future plans in singular terms. "My exit, my liquidity, my next chapter." Nora did not confront him with suspicion. She confronted the structure. She requested through Avery Cole formal financial disclosure as a prerequisite to any agreement. The request was delivered through proper channels, professional, unemotional. Terry received the notice late on a Friday afternoon. His reaction was immediate. "Are you threatening me?" he asked that night, his composure thinner than usual. "No," Nora replied evenly. "I'm protecting myself." He stared at her as if seeing an unfamiliar version of someone he believed predictable. The narrator understands something Terry is only beginning to perceive. Nora's silence was never submission. It was preparation. And while Terry moved forward, assuming compliance would follow habit, Nora moved forward, assuming that documentation would decide what habit could not. The billion-dollar deal was accelerating. So was the distance between assumption and evidence. Public humiliation rarely arrives as a single dramatic moment. It accumulates. The charity gala in Chicago was not meant to wound. It was meant to impress. Wallace Analytics had become a sponsor of the Midwest Innovation Foundation's annual fundraiser, an evening of polished speeches, auction paddles, and curated networking. Terry stood near the center of a wide ballroom, illuminated by chandeliers that softened everything into gold. Nora stood beside him. Investors circulated. Executives from adjacent industries exchanged cards. Red Crest Capital representatives were present, observing quietly. When Terry was invited to the stage for a brief recognition, he adjusted his cufflinks and delivered his remarks with practiced rhythm. "We scaled by trusting instinct," he said. "Sometimes you can't let overanalysis slow you down." Polite laughter. He gestured toward the executive table. "My team knows I move fast. They try to keep up." More laughter. Then, without looking at her directly, he added lightly, "Even my wife still doesn't really understand what we do." The room responded with gentle amusement. Nora did not. She did not flinch. She did not lower her eyes. But something within her recalibrated. It was not the joke itself. It was the casual permission it granted others to perceive her as peripheral. After the applause faded and Terry stepped down, a few guests approached Nora with polite smiles. "It must be fun watching all this," one woman said. Nora met her gaze calmly. "It's instructive," she replied. Later that evening, back in their hotel suite, Terry was buoyant. "You're too serious sometimes," he said, removing his jacket. "It was just a joke." "Language becomes record," Nora said quietly. He waved a dismissive hand. "Not everything is documentation." She did not respond. Because everything important eventually is. The following Monday, Nora logged into the company's banking portal to verify quarterly reconciliations. She had maintained oversight on certain accounts since inception, even as responsibilities shifted formally to the finance team. One transaction caught her attention. A wire transfer labeled Consulting Retainer Horizon Advisory, LLC. The amount was substantial. She searched the vendor database. Horizon Advisory, LLC did not appear in the standard approved vendor list. She opened the transaction history. 3 similar transfers had occurred over the previous 6 weeks, all authorized under executive approval. She requested supporting invoices from the finance department. The invoices were brief, generic advisory services. No detailed scope, no deliverables attached. Nora cross-referenced the LLC registration through public state records. The registered agent's name surfaced quickly. It belonged to a longtime friend of Terry's from business school. She did not draw conclusions. She opened a new folder within her encrypted archive, Executive Disbursements Horizon. She downloaded bank statements in PDF format and saved transaction confirmation numbers. She did not confront Terry. Not yet. Later that week, she reviewed an internal email chain regarding proposed equity restructuring ahead of acquisition. The subject line read, "Pre-close cleanup, confidential." The email included Terry Michael Harrington and Daniel Brooks. The discussion centered around reclassifying certain early operational roles as informal assistants rather than foundational governance. Nora read carefully. One line stood out. "We need to ensure no implied partnership narrative exists prior to closing." Implied partnership narrative. The phrase was precise. She saved the thread. That evening, Terry mentioned nothing about the email. He did, however, bring up timing again. Redcrest wants final spousal consent within 30 days, he said over dinner. They won't move forward otherwise. Nora set her fork down. Full financial disclosure is still pending, she replied. It's coming, he said quickly. Don't escalate this. Escalate. She had not raised her voice. In her office the next morning, she began compiling a timeline. Year 3, personal guarantee signed. Year 4, vendor litigation avoided through negotiated settlement. Year 5, first formal board resolutions drafted by Nora. Year 6, regulatory inquiry response authored by Nora. Year 8, compliance restructuring implemented prior to audit. Year 9, early acquisition discussions initiated. She attached supporting documentation to each entry. Emails, signed agreements, board minutes, bank confirmations. She created a parallel index cross-referencing her role in each structural decision. Not for confrontation, for clarity. Laura Chen knocked lightly on her office door that afternoon. Can we speak privately? Laura asked. Nora closed her laptop. Laura's voice remained measured. There's pressure from Redcrest to certify clean ownership before final valuation lock, she said. They've asked pointed questions about early governance structure. And Nora prompted gently. And Michael is framing everything as founder-led with informal spousal support. Support. The word landed carefully. Laura held Nora's gaze. I'm required to represent the company, she said. But accuracy matters. Nora nodded once. It does, she replied. After Laura left, Nora opened the Horizon Advisory folder again. She examined wire authorization signatures. Terry's name appeared. She checked internal approval chains. Daniel's electronic sign-off followed executive instruction. She compared transaction dates with email correspondence, referencing pre-close cleanup. Patterns aligned. She did not accuse. She documented. Later that week, during an executive review meeting, Terry presented a slide titled Governance Simplification. He spoke about efficiency, streamlined decision-making, and reducing legacy complexities. Nora listened from her usual seat near the end of the conference table. At one point, a Redcrest associate on video asked, "Were there ever any co-founders or partners with structural authority beyond current leadership?" Terry responded smoothly. No formal partners. My wife assisted early on, but she's never held equity. Nora did not interrupt. She simply noted the phrasing. Never held equity. Technically correct. But equity is not the sole measure of contribution. After the meeting, she reviewed early banking documents once more. Her name appeared as authorized signatory through year 7. Her personal guarantee remained attached to original lending documentation. She checked whether any release of guarantee had been executed formally. None existed in the archive, which meant liability had never been formally extinguished. She copied the document to her encrypted drive. That evening, Terry seemed impatient. "I don't understand why you're digging into ancient history," he said. "This is about the future." "The future rests on documented past," Nora replied. He leaned forward. "Are you trying to block the deal?" "No," she said calmly. "I'm trying to understand it." He stared at her. "You've changed," he said finally. Nora did not disagree. Change had occurred, but not in the way he believed. The narrator understands something Terry does not yet grasp. Nora's stillness is not passivity. It is calibration. She no longer assumed partnership implied protection. She no longer assumed acknowledgement would arise organically. Instead, she relied on the same principle that built the company in its earliest days. Documentation sustains truth when narrative shifts. Over the weekend, she purchased an additional encrypted storage device. She duplicated her archive. One copy remained in her locked drawer. The second she placed in a safe deposit box under her sole name. She did not dramatize the act. She treated it as risk mitigation, because pressure was increasing. Redcrest's valuation committee scheduled final review within 6 weeks. Spousal consent remained unsigned. Executive disbursements continued. and language within internal communications was narrowing her role retroactively. On Sunday evening, while Terry reviewed closing projections on his tablet, Nora opened her notebook and wrote a single line. If memory is revised, evidence must remain intact. She closed the notebook gently. Across the room, Terry believed momentum was on his side. He believed documentation could be simplified into narrative. He believed the past could be reframed as assistance rather than architecture. What he did not understand, what he had never needed to understand until now, was that Nora had built the company not only with spreadsheets and filings, but with records that did not erode under pressure. And pressure was coming. Not through confrontation, through procedure. Pressure does not always announce itself with raised voices. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a spreadsheet with missing columns. Redcrest Capital's next request list was shorter than the first, but sharper. It focused exclusively on intellectual property ownership, early governance authority, and confirmation that no third party held claims explicit or implied over core assets. Stephen Caldwell's email was polite. Given valuation threshold, we require historical clarity. Historical clarity. The phrase circulated quietly through Wallace Analytics' executive floor. Laura Chen scheduled a working session to assemble responses. Daniel Brooks brought financial models. Michael Harrington joined via video from New York. Terry took the head seat at the conference table. Nora sat to his right. The questions were technical. Confirm assignment of proprietary algorithms from original development contractors, Stephen said through the screen. Laura nodded toward Nora. She coordinated those agreements, Laura replied. Terry's jaw tightened slightly. Yes, he added quickly, but all IP has always been company property. Stephen's expression remained neutral. We'll need executed originals, he said. Nora opened her laptop and accessed the archival directory. Year 2 contractor assignments are indexed under development_IP_2015, she said. 2 were amended last quarter to correct signature sequencing. Stephen paused. Corrected. 1 document lacked a countersignature, Nora replied evenly. We secured proper execution. There was a brief silence. Good, Stephen said finally. That would have been problematic. Terry shifted in his chair. After the call ended, he remained standing. You didn't need to explain the correction, he said. They asked about historical clarity, Nora replied. You're making it sound like we were sloppy. We were young, she said. Documentation evolves. He exhaled sharply. This is why investors prefer streamlined leadership. She did not ask what that meant. Later that afternoon, Daniel Brooks stopped by her office. They're digging deeper into early governance, he said quietly. They should, Nora replied. Daniel hesitated. There's concern about narrative consistency, he added. Narrative and documentation are not synonyms, she said. He nodded once, then left. In her office, Nora opened her timeline again. She added a new column labeled External Representation. Under each year, she noted how Terry had publicly described company origins, solo founder, visionary builder, lean startup, risk taker. None of those descriptions were entirely false. They were simply incomplete. She cross-referenced them with board minutes showing her role in drafting resolutions, authorizing early hires, and formalizing compliance procedures. Implied authority existed even without equity. Authority leaves trails. 2 days later, Redcrest's compliance division sent a targeted questionnaire. One line stood out. Identify all individuals who held decision-making authority or fiduciary responsibilities prior to Series B funding. Terry read the line and responded quickly. Executive team only, he said. No external partners. Laura's eyes shifted briefly toward Nora. Nora did not speak immediately. Instead, she opened a folder and retrieved a scanned copy of a corporate resolution from year 2. The resolution appointed her acting corporate secretary, an authorized signatory, during a period when the company lacked sufficient officers. The language was simple, temporary, but it granted fiduciary responsibilities. She placed the document on the table. This resolution granted me authority over record keeping and certain approvals, she said calmly. Terry's expression hardened. That was symbolic, he said. We needed someone to sign paperwork. Signing paperwork establishes fiduciary duty, Nora replied. Silence filled the room. Laura studied the document. We should disclose this, she said carefully. Redcrest will discover it in audit. Terry leaned back slowly. It doesn't change ownership, he said. No, Nora agreed. But it clarifies governance. Governance was what Redcrest was buying as much as product. After the meeting, Terry followed Nora into the hallway. You're overplaying your role, he said quietly. I'm documenting it, she replied. You were helping, he insisted. I was structuring, she said. He stared at her as if language itself had shifted between them. That evening, she reviewed the Horizon Advisory transfers again. Additional wires had been initiated. The amounts increased incrementally. She'd examined corresponding internal approvals. The email instructions originated directly from Terry. She noticed something new. The timing of the first transfer coincided with the initial draft of the post-nuptial agreement. She added the observation to her timeline, not as accusation, as sequence. Meanwhile, Redcrest requested confirmation that all spousal claims had been resolved. Michael Harrington drafted a certification letter stating that no marital interest exists that could encumber share transfer. He forwarded the draft to Terry for review. Terry did not forward it to Nora. Laura Chen did. Nora read the letter carefully. The wording assumed completion of spousal consent. It referenced anticipated execution. Anticipated. She contacted Avery Cole. They're pre-certifying ownership clarity before my signature, Nora said. Avery's response was measured. That creates leverage, she said. Do not sign anything without full audited disclosure. I won't, Nora replied. Avery paused. Have there been unusual disbursements recently, Nora considered. Yes, she said. Collect statements, Avery instructed. Already done. Back at Wallace Analytics, tension became perceptible, though unspoken. Terry began excluding Nora from preliminary strategy calls with Redcrest. Meeting invitations arrived after discussions had concluded. She noted the pattern. She requested summaries through official channels. She archived responses. Laura's demeanor shifted subtly, more guarded in executive settings, more direct in private. One afternoon, Laura closed her office door and spoke plainly. There's internal discussion about limiting historical disclosure to what is strictly required, she said. Defined strictly, Nora replied. Ownership only, Laura answered. Nora met her gaze. Governance informs ownership, she said quietly. Laura did not disagree. The narrator sees what Terry does not. Redcrest's due diligence is not merely transactional. It is forensic. They are evaluating risk, and risk often hides in minimized history. In early November, Redcrest scheduled an on-site review in Boston. Analysts would examine original files, cross-check electronic records, and interview key personnel. Terry treated it as ceremony. Nora treated it as audit. The night before the visit, she stayed late organizing archival binders. Not because they were required digital access existed, but because physical continuity reinforced credibility. She labeled each binder spine in consistent font. She placed the earliest board minutes at the front of the conference room credenza. When Redcrest's team arrived, they requested to review initial governance documentation. Nora presented the binders. One analyst flipped through the early resolutions and paused. These are unusually thorough for a company at that stage, he said. Nora did not smile. Structure prevents correction, later she replied. The analyst nodded slowly. Terry observed from across the table, his expression unreadable. As the review concluded, Stephen Caldwell requested a brief private conversation with Terry. They stepped into Terry's office. Through the glass wall, Nora could see gestures measured but firm. When Terry emerged, his face was composed but tight. They're requesting supplemental disclosure regarding early fiduciary roles, he said to the room. Of course, Nora replied. He glanced at her. This doesn't mean anything. It means clarity, she said. Later that evening at home, Terry's patience thinned. You're turning routine review into a structural debate, he said. It was always structural, Nora answered. You're acting like you're a co-founder. She held his gaze steadily. Documentation does not require a title, she said. He turned away. The gap between narrative and record was widening. Redcrest's valuation committee postponed final confirmation pending additional governance review. Not a cancellation, a delay. Terry viewed it as inconvenience. Nora viewed it as inevitability, because history, when requested under scrutiny, does not respond to simplification. It responds to documentation. And documentation she knew was complete. Discovery rarely arrives as revelation. It arrives as pattern. The Horizon advisory transfers continued. 3 more wires within a 2-week span. The amounts were structured carefully large enough to matter small enough to avoid triggering internal threshold alerts. Each labeled under vague advisory services. Each approved at executive level. Nora did not assume fraud. She assumed sequence. She downloaded updated bank statements and overlaid the transaction dates against 2 parallel timelines, acquisition milestones and marital paperwork drafts. The alignment tightened. First Horizon transfer 3 days after initial post-nuptial draft. Second transfer 1 week before Redcrest's governance questionnaire. Third transfer 2 days after spousal consent certification letter circulated internally. Money moves with intention. She searched public corporate registries again for Horizon Advisory LLC. The registered address matched a small office building in Stamford, Connecticut. The managing member, Ethan Wallace, Terry's cousin. Nora leaned back in her chair. She did not feel shock. She felt confirmation. She printed nothing. Instead, she captured screenshots of registry filings and saved certified copies from the Secretary of State website. She added them to her encrypted folder. Later that afternoon, she requested from Daniel a breakdown of executive consulting expenditures over the past quarter. Daniel's hesitation was brief, but visible. Terry approved those directly, he said carefully. I'm aware, Nora replied. I'm reviewing cost allocation. He forwarded the spreadsheet. The entries were sparse. Descriptions lacked specificity. No performance deliverables attached. She cross-referenced internal email communications. One thread marked confidential pre-close adjustments, referenced ensuring flexibility post-liquidity. Flexibility. The word appeared 3 times. She archived the thread. That evening, Terry mentioned casually that he would be in New York for several days to accelerate final terms. Nora nodded. She did not ask who he was meeting. She already knew Redcrest executives were scheduled for in-person sessions. What she did not expect was the secondary discovery. While reviewing shared cloud storage permissions, she noticed a recently created folder labeled Personal Transition. Access restricted, owned by Terry. She did not attempt unauthorized entry. Instead, she reviewed system logs. File names were visible even when contents were not. Draft_settlement_terms.docs. Property_reallocation.xlsrx. Temporary_residence_list.pdf. Temporary residence. The word lingered. 2 days later, a courier delivered documents to their Boston home. Divorce petition, filed in New York County. Grounds cited irreconcilable differences. Nora read the filing slowly. The timing was precise. Filed 3 weeks before projected acquisition closing. The petition referenced separate property claims consistent with the post-nuptial draft she had not signed. Terry called that evening. I didn't want you blindsided, he said. You filed, she replied. Yes, he answered. It's cleaner this way. We both move forward, cleaner. The word again. You filed before financial disclosure, she said. It doesn't change anything, he insisted. You'll be taken care of. Taken care of. Language that reduces partnership to provision. Nora did not argue. When is the first hearing, she asked. Preliminary conference in 2 weeks, he said. Thank you for the information, she replied. He paused. You're not going to fight this, are you? Fight. She looked at the bank statement still open on her screen. I'm going to review it, she said. After ending the call, she contacted Avery Cole. He filed, Nora said simply. Avery's tone remained steady. Then we respond formally. Timing is strategic. Do not engage informally. He filed before closing, Nora said. Of course he did, Avery replied. The following morning, Nora opened a new master folder, Divorce Asset Intersection. She organized subfolders, Bank Transfers, Horizon Governance History, Spousal Consent Drafts, Acquisition Timeline, Personal Guarantees. She requested from the bank formal documentation confirming her personal guarantee status. The response arrived within 48 hours. No release on record, which meant she remained liable for early corporate debt despite Terry's narrative of separate ownership. She forwarded the document to Avery. This is material, Avery said. Yes, Nora replied. Meanwhile, at Wallace Analytics, internal tension intensified. Red Crest's compliance division requested written certification that no pending marital dispute could impair transfer of control. Michael Harrington drafted a cautious response noting ongoing personal proceedings. Redcrest replied within hours. Clarify potential claims affecting equity valuation. Valuation. The billion-dollar figure was now conditional. Terry called Nora late that night. Redcrest is overreacting, he said. They're assessing risk, she replied. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. I'm responding through counsel, she said. Silence followed. You never wanted this deal, he said suddenly. Nora considered the accusation. I wanted transparency, she answered. He exhaled sharply. This is exactly why I needed separation before closing. The admission hovered between them. Before closing, sequence confirmed. She did not raise her voice. Then we proceed through court, she said. The next week, Avery filed a formal response, contesting unilateral separate property claims and requesting full financial disclosure under New York's equitable distribution statutes. Simultaneously, Avery submitted a motion for temporary financial restraint, preventing significant asset transfer pending review. Procedure: unemotional, precise. Redcrest's valuation committee postponed final signing ceremony. Publicly, nothing changed. Privately, uncertainty entered the room. Laura Chen requested a meeting with Terry. Through the glass wall of his office, Nora observed controlled but intense conversation. When Laura exited, her expression was measured but grave. Terry must provide complete disclosure to both Redcrest and the court, she said to Nora privately. This is no longer internal. Nora nodded. It never had been. Meanwhile, Horizon Advisory transfers ceased abruptly. No announcement, no explanation. She documented the final transaction date. During the preliminary court conference in New York, Nora appeared beside Avery Cole in a quiet courtroom lined with dark wood. Terry stood across from her with Michael Harrington and separate divorce counsel. The judge reviewed filings. Full financial disclosure within 30 days, the judge ordered calmly. No significant asset transfers without notice. Procedure formalized what Nora had already anticipated. As they exited the courtroom, Terry attempted a softer tone. It doesn't have to be hostile, he said. It isn't, she replied. He searched her face for anger. He found none, only steadiness. Back in Boston, Nora reviewed the acquisition calendar. Projected closing date, 6 weeks. Discovery deadline and divorce proceeding 4 weeks. Overlap was no accident. She updated her timeline with a new header convergence point. The narrator understands something Terry has not fully grasped. He believes sequence would protect him. File for divorce before closing. Secure spousal waiver. Transfer shares cleanly. Exit with liquidity unencumbered. But procedure introduces scrutiny, and scrutiny illuminates patterns. Nora did not seek humiliation. She did not seek revenge. She sought record alignment. As she saved the latest court order into her encrypted archive, she wrote a brief note in her notebook. Legal process converts silence into documentation. Outside her window, Boston's skyline remained unchanged. Inside boardrooms in New York, valuation models recalculated risk adjustments. Inside court filings, asset declarations awaited sworn signatures. The billion-dollar deal was still alive. So was the marriage, at least on paper. But now, both were subject to the same force: disclosure. And disclosure does not bend to narrative. It answers to evidence. Service of process is never theatrical. It is procedural. Nora had already received the divorce petition by courier, but formal service arrived at Wallace Analytics on a gray Monday morning. A process server requested her by name at reception. The exchange was polite, almost mundane. Employees pretended not to notice. Nora accepted the envelope, thanked the server, and returned to her office without visible reaction. Within an hour, whispers circulated through the executive floor. By noon, Terry had called an unscheduled leadership meeting. "This is a personal matter," he said evenly, standing at the head of the table. "It won't affect operations." Daniel Brooks nodded cautiously. Laura Chen's expression revealed less certainty. Nora sat silently, hands folded over a slim notebook. She did not contradict him. But Redcrest had already requested clarification regarding marital claims. Operations were not isolated from equity. After the meeting, Terry approached Nora in the hallway. "We didn't need to involve the office like this," he said. "You filed in New York," she replied calmly. "Public record," he exhaled. "I wanted it handled quietly." "Then it should have been handled transparently," she answered. There was no accusation in her tone, only sequence. 2 days later, she attended the preliminary conference in Manhattan with Avery Cole. The courtroom was not grand, just orderly. Dark wood, fluorescent light, quiet authority. Terry stood across the aisle with his counsel. The judge reviewed initial filings. "Both parties will exchange full financial disclosure within 30 days, the judge stated. "No significant asset transfers without court awareness." The words were procedural, but they placed structure around timing. Outside the courtroom, Terry attempted a familiar approach. "You don't have to drag this out," he said. "We can settle privately. Disclosure first," Nora replied. He studied her as though measuring a version of her he had underestimated. "You think I'm hiding something?" he asked. "I think valuation is pending," she said. He did not respond. Back in Boston, Avery began formal discovery. Requests for production of documents, detailed interrogatories regarding asset transfers, subpoena drafts prepared if needed. Nora supplied Avery with meticulously organized files. Bank statements showing Horizon Advisory transfers, original personal guarantee documentation, email chains referencing pre-close cleanup, board resolutions bearing her signature. Avery examined the archive with careful attention. "You've preserved sequence," she said. "Yes," Nora replied. "Sequence establishes intent," Avery added. Meanwhile, Redcrest's valuation committee scheduled a conditional review session. Stephen Caldwell requested updated disclosure regarding any marital proceedings that could impact ownership integrity. Michael Harrington drafted a response emphasizing that the divorce was amicable and unrelated to company operations. Redcrest replied within hours. "Please confirm whether spousal consent has been executed." It had not. Inside Wallace Analytics, pressure thickened. Daniel approached Nora privately. "Redcrest is modeling downside risk," he said quietly. "They're adjusting valuation scenarios based on what Nora asked." "Uncertainty," he replied. "Uncertainty in billion-dollar transactions carries numeric consequences." Later that week, Terry invited Nora to his office. The blinds were half closed. He gestured for her to sit. "We can settle this now," he said. "You'll receive a generous distribution under equitable terms. We don't need forensic accountants." "Avery has already engaged one," Nora replied. His jaw tightened. "You're escalating unnecessarily." "I'm responding procedurally," she said. He leaned forward. "You never cared about ownership before." "Documentation doesn't expire," she answered. He studied her. "You're not angry," he observed. "No," she said. "You're not emotional." "No." "Then what is this clarity?" He looked away first. The forensic accountant, Rachel Monroe, began reviewing financial flows in detail. She requested complete general ledger exports, bank confirmations, and executive compensation schedules. Within days, Rachel identified the Horizon Advisory transfers. "These lack substantiation," she noted. Nora nodded. Rachel cross-referenced the transfers with acquisition milestones. "The timing is notable," she said carefully. Sequenced, Nora replied. Rachel requested additional supporting documentation from Wallace Analytics through formal channels. Michael Harrington responded cautiously, providing partial invoices, but no detailed deliverables. Rachel documented the insufficiency. In New York, during a follow-up conference call between counsel, Avery raised the issue formally. "We have identified substantial transfers to an affiliated entity prior to filing." Avery stated calmly, "We request full disclosure of purpose and contractual basis." Terry's divorce attorney responded defensively. "Consulting arrangements are standard executive prerogative. Then documentation should be readily available." Avery replied. Silence followed. Redcrest's legal team became aware of the inquiry within days. They requested confirmation that no assets were being diverted pre-closing. Michael attempted reassurance, but Redcrest's compliance division scheduled a direct call with Terry. In that call, Stephen Caldwell's tone remained professional. "We need transparency," he said. "Material misrepresentation could terminate negotiations." Material misrepresentation. The phrase carried weight. After the call, Terry paced his office. "This is getting out of control," he muttered. Laura Chen responded evenly. "It's entering compliance review," she said. Meanwhile, Nora continued her routines. She arrived at the office at 7:30 a.m. She reviewed document requests. She responded to counsel emails. She archived every exchange. In quiet moments, she felt neither vindictive nor triumphant. She felt focused. One afternoon, Terry approached her again. "What do you want?" he asked. "Full disclosure," she replied. "And then resolution," she said. He laughed lightly without humor. "You're willing to risk the deal?" "I'm unwilling to sign inaccurately," she answered. He stared at her. "Do you know what this exit means?" "Yes," she said. "It means freedom." She considered the word. "Freedom without integrity is exposure," she replied. He turned away. The narrator understands something. Terry is only beginning to feel control, has shifted from narrative to process. Divorce proceedings and acquisition negotiations now intersected. Discovery deadlines overlapped with closing milestones. Forensic analysis ran parallel to valuation modeling. Silence, which Terry once interpreted as passivity, had become preparation. 2 weeks before projected closing, the court scheduled a status hearing regarding disclosure compliance. Simultaneously, Redcrest postponed final signing ceremony pending confirmation of unencumbered ownership. The press knew nothing. Employees sensed tension. Board members requested reassurance. And Nora continued documenting. One evening, alone in her office, she reviewed the earliest board resolution she had drafted a decade earlier. It bore her signature in blue ink, temporary corporate secretary. She traced the date with her eyes. History does not vanish because it becomes inconvenient. It resurfaces when scrutinized. The billion-dollar deal remained possible. So did equitable distribution. But neither would proceed without documentation aligning. Nora closed her laptop and turned off the office lights. Across the city, Terry reviewed liquidity projections that no longer appeared certain. He had believed timing would protect him. File first, close fast, control narrative. What he had not accounted for was that legal procedure moves deliberately. And when it intersects with acquisition, due diligence silence becomes evidence. Nora did not need to raise her voice. She had already raised the record. Avery Cole did not waste time on emotion. She wasted nothing. When she first met Nora Long, she had recognized a familiar pattern: high-asset divorce intersecting with pending liquidity event. But what distinguished Nora was not indignation. It was organization. By the time formal discovery commenced, Avery's conference table was lined with labeled binders and a mirrored digital archive structured with forensic precision. Rachel Monroe, the forensic accountant, joined them on a video call one Tuesday morning. Her tone was analytical, stripped of narrative. "I've mapped the Horizon advisory transfers," Rachel began. "Total disbursement over 12 weeks exceeds 7 figures." Nora did not react visibly. Rachel continued. "The entity is affiliated through family connection. Invoices lack substantive deliverables. Timing correlates with pre-closing restructuring." Avery folded her hands. "That suggests asset repositioning," she said. "Or pre-liquidity shielding," Rachel added. Neither woman dramatized the conclusion. They did not need to. Avery drafted a formal request for supplemental production all contracts between Wallace Analytics and Horizon Advisory LLC. Communications regarding consulting scope, internal approval memoranda, and documentation of services rendered. Simultaneously, she prepared a motion for temporary injunction preventing further extraordinary disbursements. Procedure: precise, measured. Across town in the executive suite of Wallace Analytics, Terry reviewed the motion with visible irritation. "This is absurd," he said to Michael Harrington. "Consulting is normal." Michael adjusted his glasses. "In isolation, yes," he said. "In context of pending divorce and acquisition, optics matter." "Optics," Terry repeated. "Compliance exposure," Michael corrected. The word landed heavier. Meanwhile, Red Crest Capital scheduled an emergency compliance review. Stephen Caldwell's email was concise. "Given concurrent marital proceedings and identified transfers, we require enhanced disclosure before proceeding to escrow. The final stage before liquidity." The delay rippled through valuation models. Daniel Brooks recalculated scenarios under revised risk assumptions. Potential holdbacks increased. Escrow contingencies expanded. Numbers shifted quietly. Nora did not request updates. She continued focusing on documentation. Avery advised her to request temporary financial relief to ensure equitable access to resources during proceedings. Nora declined. "I have personal savings," she said. Avery studied her. "This isn't about need," she said. "It's about leverage." "Leverage exists in record," Nora replied. Avery nodded slowly. "You understand process," she said. "Yes." In court, the judge reviewed the motion regarding extraordinary transfers. Terry's counsel argued that consulting fees were legitimate executive decisions unrelated to marital distribution. Avery responded evenly. "The timing and affiliation warrant transparency. We are not alleging impropriety. We are requesting documentation." The judge ordered production within 10 days. Back at Wallace Analytics, Laura Chen called a closed-door meeting. "Terry," she said carefully, "Red Crest has flagged governance risk. They want written assurance that no material facts were omitted in initial representations." "They're overreacting," Terry replied. "They're protecting valuation," Laura said. Valuation. The billion-dollar figure now carried conditional footnotes. Nora continued compiling her governance chronology. She added sworn affidavits describing her role in early operational structuring, not emotional testimony, but factual enumeration. Drafted compliance matrix. Negotiated vendor settlements. Executed banking authorizations. Maintained board minutes. Signed corporate resolutions. Personal guarantee extended. Each entry cross-referenced with documentary support. Rachel Monroe completed a preliminary asset tracing report. Funds transferred to Horizon appear to remain within affiliated accounts, she noted. No evidence yet of external dissipation. Intent remains relevant, Avery said. Yes, Rachel agreed. Intent is inferred through pattern. In a private meeting requested by Terry, he attempted a different tone. "We can settle this quietly," he said. "Red Crest doesn't need to know everything." Red Crest requested disclosure. Nora replied. "You're jeopardizing the deal. I'm responding to court order," she said. He leaned forward. "You always said you didn't want attention." "I don't," she replied. "Then why do this publicly procedure is not publicity," she said. He studied her as if expecting anger. There was none, only steadiness. 2 weeks before projected closing, Red Crest's valuation committee issued a conditional term sheet revision. Escrow holdback increased. Representation warranties expanded to include explicit marital claim disclosure. Stephen Caldwell requested direct confirmation from Nora's counsel that any equitable interest would be resolved prior to closing. Avery responded formally, marital property claims remain under court review. No waiver executed, disclosure ongoing. The response was factual, unembellished. Inside, Wallace Analytics board members expressed concern. One independent director requested a governance audit summary. Daniel provided financial clarity. Laura provided legal context. Nora remained silent during the board call. She was no longer positioned as operational authority in those rooms, but her documentation circulated. Privately, Daniel approached her. Redcrest's risk model has reduced projected valuation by 5% pending resolution, he said quietly. 5% of $1 billion is not symbolic. Nora did not comment on the number. Instead, she asked, "Has Horizon produced service contracts?" Daniel hesitated. Not yet. Sequence tightening. Rachel completed a supplemental analysis comparing Horizon transfers against internal budget allocations. Funds originated from discretionary executive pools, she said. Reclassification would alter EBITDA presentation. EBITDA. Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Acquisition valuation often hinges on its stability. Avery reviewed the analysis. That's material, she said. She prepared notice to court requesting accounting clarification under oath. Terry's frustration became more visible. "You're dragging accountants into something that could have been simple," he said during a brief encounter in the company parking garage. "Simple for whom?" Nora asked quietly. "For us," he replied. "We are not aligned on us," she said. He looked at her differently then, not with anger, with realization. The narrative he had constructed, solo founder independent exit clean separation, was encountering structural resistance, not from confrontation, from documentation. The next court appearance required Terry to submit sworn financial statements. Under oath. Rachel prepared summary exhibits highlighting inconsistencies between internal transfers and reported liquidity. Avery did not overstate. She did not accuse. She allowed numbers to speak. The judge ordered comprehensive accounting of affiliated transactions. Simultaneously, Redcrest paused final escrow scheduling pending material clarity. Pause, not termination. But momentum shifted. In her apartment that evening, Nora opened her notebook. She did not record emotion. She recorded sequence. Acquisition inquiry initiated. Post-nuptial draft issued. Horizon transfers initiated. Divorce filing executed. Disclosure motion granted. Valuation adjusted. Patterns converge. The narrator understands something Terry now feels, but does not articulate. Process has overtaken performance. Boardrooms respond to numbers. Courtrooms respond to sworn testimony. Both respond to documentation. Nora had never sought equity publicly. She had never requested title. She had never demanded recognition. But she had preserved record, and record once submitted under oath alters negotiation. The billion-dollar deal still stood, but it stood under scrutiny, and scrutiny favors those who prepared. Nora closed her notebook gently. Across the city, Terry recalculated scenarios that no longer depended solely on timing. He had believed speed would protect him, but procedure moves deliberately, and deliberation, when aligned with evidence, is stronger than urgency. Depositions are not dramatic. They are deliberate. The conference room in Manhattan, where Terry Wallace sat for sworn testimony, was narrow and brightly lit. A court reporter positioned herself near the center of the table. Two attorneys represented Terry Michael Harrington for corporate matters, and his divorce counsel seated beside him. Across from them sat Avery Cole. Nora was not present in the room. She did not need to be. Her documentation was. The deposition began with routine questions: name, occupation, role within Wallace Analytics. "I am the founder and chief executive officer," Terry said confidently. "And since inception, have you been the sole decision-maker regarding corporate governance?" Avery asked evenly. "Yes," he replied without hesitation. Avery slid a document across the table. A corporate resolution from year 2. Signed in blue ink. Nora Long, acting corporate secretary. Do you recognize this document? Avery asked. Terry glanced at it briefly. Yes, he said. It was a formality. Please describe the authority granted under this resolution. It was temporary, he replied. Administrative. Did it authorize Miss Long to execute binding corporate documents? Avery asked. Yes, but thank you. The court reporter's keys clicked steadily. Precision replaces argument in deposition. Later, Avery turned to financial matters. Please explain the purpose of transfers to Horizon Advisory LLC over the past quarter. Consulting services, Terry answered. What services specifically? Strategic advisory, provided by whom a consultant retained through Horizon. Do you have documentation of deliverables? Michael Harrington interjected briefly to clarify privilege boundaries. Avery waited. Terry hesitated. Documentation is being compiled, he said. Were these transfers initiated before or after the initial draft of a post-nuptial agreement was presented to Miss Long? Avery asked calmly. I don't see the relevance, Terry replied. It goes to timing, Avery said. Timing. The word resurfaced. Hours later, when deposition concluded, Terry's composure remained intact but thinner. In Boston, Rachel Monroe finalized her forensic summary. Transfers coincide with divorce filing preparation, she said during a conference call with Avery and Nora. And with projected valuation lock, Nora listened without interruption. Rachel continued. There is no evidence of personal dissipation yet, but funds remain within affiliated entity lacking substantiation, which affects EBITDA presentation, Avery added. Yes, Rachel confirmed. EBITDA stability influences acquisition multiples. Redcrest's compliance division had already requested supplemental financial assurances. Stephen Caldwell scheduled a private call with Terry. Laura Chen joined. Material misrepresentation carries termination risk, Stephen said plainly. We require written confirmation of full disclosure to both court and investors. We are cooperating, Terry responded. Stephen's tone remained measured. Cooperation must be complete. In the weeks following deposition, sworn financial statements were filed. Under oath, Terry disclosed assets, liabilities, and pending transactions. Rachel compared these statements against internal ledger data. Discrepancies surfaced, not vast but notable. Projected executive compensation adjustments had not been reflected. Affiliated entity transfers required clearer classification. Avery prepared a supplemental submission highlighting inconsistencies without accusation. She framed them as clarification requests. Court procedure does not reward theatrics. It rewards specificity. Meanwhile, inside Wallace Analytics board members expressed increasing concern. An independent director requested a governance review summary in light of marital proceedings. Laura Chen presented a careful overview. Nora Long held documented fiduciary roles in early years, she said. Disclosure has been updated accordingly. The narrative of singular founder began to fracture not publicly but within minutes and memos. Daniel Brooks met privately with Terry afterward. They're modeling holdback expansion, Daniel said. If escrow increases, your immediate liquidity decreases. How much? Terry asked. Potentially 8%. 8% of $1 billion is not trivial. Terry remained silent. In her apartment, Nora reviewed a transcript of the deposition. She read Terry's answers without visible reaction. When he described her early involvement as supportive assistance, she paused. The record contained more than his summary. It contained her signatures, her guarantee, her governance. The transcript would remain permanent. That permanence mattered. A week later, Avery scheduled Nora's deposition. Nora arrived in a navy suit, hair pulled back neatly. She carried no folder. She did not need to. State your name for the record, the court reporter requested. Nora Elaine Long, she answered. Describe your role in Wallace Analytics during its formative years. I drafted compliance protocols, she said. Executed banking authorizations, maintained corporate records, negotiated vendor settlements, structured early governance documentation. Were you compensated for these contributions? Terry's counsel asked. No separate salary beyond marital income, she replied. Did you hold equity? No. Then on what basis do you assert claim marital contribution and documented fiduciary authority? She said calmly. Her voice did not waver. When asked about horizon transfers, she did not speculate. I observed the transactions, she said. I documented timing relative to acquisition and divorce filings. Do you allege fraud? Opposing counsel asked sharply. No, Nora replied. I allege incomplete disclosure. The distinction was deliberate. After her deposition concluded, Avery walked beside her down the courthouse hallway. You were precise, Avery said. Precision prevents misinterpretation, Nora replied. Redcrest received transcripts within days. Stephen Caldwell convened an internal risk review. The governance narrative requires revision, one analyst observed. Does this alter valuation materially? Another asked. It increases risk exposure. Stephen replied. Escrow must reflect that. Negotiations slowed. Terry's liquidity projections narrowed further. Publicly, Wallace Analytics continued operations without visible disruption. Privately, compliance emails multiplied. Michael Harrington recommended exploring settlement to expedite clarity. Terry resisted initially. She's not entitled to ownership, he insisted. Laura Chen responded quietly. She's entitled to process. Process had become the central force in both courtroom and boardroom. One afternoon, Terry called Nora directly. This doesn't have to end like this, he said. It hasn't ended, she replied. You're forcing scrutiny. Disclosure invites scrutiny, she answered. He hesitated. You could sign consent and move forward. Consent requires accuracy, she said. Silence stretched. You don't want revenge, he asked suddenly. No, she said. What do you want, record alignment? He exhaled. The billion-dollar deal remained viable but conditional. Escrow terms expanded. Representation warranties strengthened. Marital claim disclosures appended. Momentum, once swift, now moved through checkpoints. The narrator understands something Terry is only beginning to accept. Narrative alone cannot override sworn testimony. Under oath, language narrows. Under review, numbers clarify. And Nora, who had built structure quietly for a decade now, relied on the same discipline. Not to humiliate, not to accuse, but to ensure that what was written matched what had occurred. Late one evening, she reopened the earliest email Terry had ever sent her after their first funding round. Couldn't do this without you. She closed it without sentimentality. The record now said otherwise. But the documentation preserved context beyond memory. And in both court and acquisition, review context matters. The final escrow date remained unscheduled. The divorce proceeding moved forward. Evidence accumulated without spectacle. And somewhere between valuation models and sworn affidavits, the silent architecture Nora had built was no longer invisible. It was referenced. Pressure, when sustained, does not explode. It compresses. By the time the second court conference convened in Manhattan, the billion-dollar acquisition had entered what Redcrest Capital termed conditional pause. Not termination, not collapse. A pause pending clarity. Clarity had become the central currency. Terry sat straighter than usual at counsel's table. His suit was immaculate, his expression controlled. Across the aisle, Nora sat beside Avery Cole, hands resting calmly over a slim legal pad. The judge reviewed supplemental filings. Mr. Wallace, the judge, began. Evenly, the court has received partial documentation regarding affiliated transfers and governance history. Production remains incomplete. Terry's counsel responded quickly. We are compiling materials. The court requires completion within 10 days, the judge said. Additionally, no further extraordinary transactions shall occur without written notice. Procedure tightened. Outside the courtroom, reporters lingered for unrelated cases. No one approached them. The matter remained private for now. But Redcrest was watching. In a conference room overlooking Park Avenue, Stephen Caldwell convened his compliance team. Exposure is increasing, one analyst said. Marital claim intersects with fiduciary history, another added. Representations must be amended. Stephen nodded slowly. We proceed only with documented alignment, he said. Alignment. Back in Boston, Laura Chen drafted revised disclosure schedules for the acquisition agreement. She added language acknowledging early fiduciary roles held by Nora Long. She incorporated court-mandated accounting of affiliated transfers. Michael Harrington reviewed the revisions with visible reluctance. "This expands representation scope," he said. "It reflects reality," Laura replied. Reality, once minimized, was now contractual. Meanwhile, Avery received the remaining financial disclosures from Terry's legal team. Rachel Monroe analyzed them within hours. There are additional transfers routed through Horizon that were reclassified as deferred advisory compensation, Rachel reported during a call. "Substantiated?" Avery asked. "Minimal documentation," Rachel replied. "No measurable service outputs." Nora listened silently. Rachel continued. More importantly, projected executive bonus accruals were adjusted downward prior to divorce filing, temporarily reducing reported personal income. Avery's voice remained steady. "That affects equitable distribution calculations." "Yes," Rachel confirmed. "Numbers, when rearranged, strategically alter outcomes. But under forensic review, rearrangement becomes visible." Avery filed a supplemental notice with the court highlighting discrepancies without dramatic language. Clarification requested regarding timing and classification of executive compensation adjustments. The phrasing was deliberate. No accusation, only request. That same week, Redcrest requested a joint call with both corporate and divorce counsel present. The tone was no longer informal. "We require assurance that any equitable claim by Miss Long is quantified prior to closing," Stephen said plainly. "We cannot expose investors to post-closing litigation," Terry responded defensively. "She has no equity." Stephen paused. Equitable interest and equity shares are distinct concepts. Silence followed. The distinction mattered. After the call ended, Terry closed his office door. "You're forcing valuation erosion," he said to Laura. Laura did not flinch. "Disclosure prevents litigation," she replied. In her apartment that evening, Nora reviewed the updated acquisition draft forwarded by Laura. Her name now appeared in disclosure schedules, not as shareholder, not as executive, but as historical fiduciary participant with potential marital claim under court review. It was not recognition, it was acknowledgement. The difference mattered. A week later, settlement discussions were proposed. Terry's counsel reached out to Avery with an offer framed as expedited resolution, substantial but contingent on immediate spousal consent execution. Avery reviewed the proposal with Nora. "They're offering liquidity in exchange for silence and speed," Avery said. "Does it reflect documented contribution?" Nora asked. "It reflects convenience," Avery replied. Nora closed the folder. "Then it's incomplete." She did not raise her voice. She did not express indignation. She simply declined. Redcrest's valuation committee recalculated again. Escrow holdback increased to cover potential marital distribution. Projected immediate payout to Terry decreased. The board of Wallace Analytics requested a private session excluding Terry. Daniel Brooks presented updated financial exposure. Laura summarized legal intersections. One independent director asked a simple question. Was Miss Long's role previously understated in acquisition materials? Laura answered carefully. "Yes." The director nodded once. "Then correction is prudent." Correction. Narrative adjusting under pressure. Later that afternoon, Terry requested a private meeting with Nora. They sat across from each other in a neutral conference room. "This is spiraling," he said. "It is progressing," she replied. "You're costing both of us." "I'm documenting both of us," she answered. He leaned back, frustration evident. "You could have walked away quietly. I was asked to sign inaccurately," she said. He stared at her. "You're not trying to ruin me," he observed slowly. "No," she replied. "Then what alignment?" she said. He exhaled. The word had followed them for months. Alignment between record and representation. Between valuation and disclosure. Between marriage and contribution. Meanwhile, Rachel completed a final supplemental report. Total affiliated transfers exceed disclosed consulting value by significant margin, she said during a final review call. Classification impacts EBITDA stability. Avery filed notice with court requesting judicial review of compensation adjustments and affiliated transfers under oath. Redcrest received the report within days. Stephen Caldwell responded decisively. Closing is suspended pending court-validated resolution of marital claim and compensation disclosure, he wrote. Suspended, not canceled, but halted. In the quiet of her apartment that night, Nora did not celebrate. She did not feel vindicated. She felt steady. Procedure had done what confrontation never could. It had slowed momentum long enough for documentation to surface fully. Across the city, Terry reviewed the suspension notice alone. He had believed speed would shield him. File early, close fast, frame narrative. But acquisition due diligence and divorce discovery move at similar pace. And when they intersect, speed yields to scrutiny. The narrator understands something neither boardroom nor courtroom announces aloud. Justice in corporate matters rarely arrives with applause. It arrives through amended schedules, revised escrow terms, sworn disclosures, and delayed signatures. Nora closed her notebook after writing a single line. Silence becomes structure when supported by record. The billion-dollar deal was no longer imminent. The divorce was no longer unilateral. Both awaited alignment. And alignment, once required formally, does not retreat easily. Turning points in corporate disputes rarely arrive with raised voices. They arrive in attachments. The email that shifted the balance was sent at 6:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. Subject line: Supplemental Disclosure Governance and Affiliated Transfers. It came from Avery Cole to Terry's counsel, with copies to Redcrest's legal team per prior agreement. Attached were 3 documents. First, a compiled email chain spanning 9 years, beginning with Terry's original request that Nora serve as acting corporate secretary during formative months, acknowledging in writing that she would handle governance until we formalize structure. Second, certified bank records showing Nora's personal guarantee attached to the company's initial credit line, never formally released. Third, a forensic accounting summary prepared by Rachel Monroe, detailing the timing and classification inconsistencies of Horizon Advisory transfers in relation to divorce filing and acquisition milestones. The body of the email was measured. For the purpose of alignment and transparency, please review the attached documentation. We request confirmation that these materials will be incorporated into disclosure schedules for both court and acquisition proceedings. No accusation, no threat, just alignment. By 9:00 a.m., Redcrest's compliance division had convened. Stephen Caldwell studied the attachments in silence. "These are material, one," analyst said. "Yes," Stephen replied. "Does this constitute misrepresentation?" "It constitutes incomplete representation," he answered carefully. In Boston, Terry read the email alone in his office. He scrolled through the email chain first. His own words stared back at him from nearly a decade earlier. "I need you to sign these. You'll be secretary until we can afford someone official." He remembered writing it casually. Temporary, practical, not strategic. He moved to the bank guarantee document. Nora's signature, his beside it. Then the forensic summary. Dates aligned in columns. Transfer initiation, post-nuptial draft, divorce filing, acquisition term sheet, sequence. His phone rang. Michael Harrington's voice was lower than usual. "We have exposure," Michael said. Exposure to what Terry asked sharply. To claims of bad faith in asset classification. And to Redcrest revising terms further. "This is exaggerated," Terry replied. "It's documented," Michael answered. That distinction mattered. Within hours, Redcrest issued a formal notice. Closing cannot proceed until court resolution clarifies equitable interest and affiliated transaction classification. Not pause, not delay. Cannot proceed. The language was decisive. Inside Wallace Analytics, the board assembled for an emergency call. Laura Chen summarized the situation without embellishment. "Disclosure materials have expanded," she said. "Acquisition contingent on judicial clarity." One director spoke plainly. Were we aware of personal guarantee status? Silence followed. Daniel Brooks answered carefully. It was historical, not formally extinguished. The director's tone sharpened. Historical liabilities remain liabilities. Across the city in Avery Cole's office, Nora sat quietly while Rachel reviewed updated financial projections. If Horizon transfers are reclassified, Rachel said reported EBITDA increases artificially during certain quarters, which affects valuation multiple, Avery added. Yes, Rachel confirmed. Is this fraud? Avery asked. Rachel paused. It is timing-sensitive classification, she said. Intent may be inferred. Inference. Courtrooms treat inference differently than boardrooms. Avery prepared a motion requesting court acknowledgement that affiliated transfers and compensation adjustments occurred in proximity to divorce filing and acquisition structuring. The motion did not accuse. It presented chronology. Chronology when precise speaks. In court 2 days later, the judge reviewed the supplemental filings. Mr. Wallace, the judge said evenly, the court requires sworn clarification regarding affiliated transactions and compensation adjustments. Terry's counsel attempted mitigation. These are business decisions unrelated to marital dissolution. The judge glanced at the timeline exhibit. The proximity suggests relevance, the judge replied. Full transparency is mandatory. Under oath, Terry answered questions regarding Horizon Advisory. Yes, my cousin facilitated introductions, he said. Were services rendered? Avery asked. Yes. Documented informally. Compensated formally? Yes. Prior to divorce filing? Yes. The court reporter's keys echoed. Precision leaves little room for narrative shading. After the hearing, Terry approached Nora in the courthouse corridor. You've made your point, he said quietly. I presented record, she replied. You could have humiliated me publicly. I did not, she said. He studied her face. You could have accused. I requested alignment, she answered. The difference had defined the entire process. Later that afternoon, Red Crest's final decision arrived. Stephen Caldwell called Terry directly. We are restructuring the transaction, he said. Equitable interest will be quantified prior to closing. Escrow holdback adjusted. Governance disclosure amended. And if I refuse? Terry asked. Then we withdraw, Stephen replied calmly. Silence stretched. Withdrawal meant no billion-dollar exit. It meant public scrutiny of abandoned deal. It meant valuation collapse. Terry understood leverage now, not emotional leverage. Structural. That evening he called Nora. What do you want formally? He asked. Equitable recognition of documented contribution, she replied. And then you'll sign if disclosure is complete, she said. He exhaled slowly. You never wanted revenge. No, she answered. You wanted record. Yes. In Avery's office the following day, settlement terms were drafted reflecting Nora's documented contributions and marital equity rights. Not as co-founder, not as shareholder, but as equitable participant whose fiduciary involvement and personal guarantee materially supported the company's survival. Redcrest incorporated the settlement into acquisition conditions. Escrow funds allocated accordingly. Disclosure schedules amended. No press release mentioned Nora's name. But within legal documentation, her role was no longer minimized. In the final board meeting before revised signing, Laura Chen addressed governance history explicitly. Early fiduciary roles held by Nora Long were integral to foundational compliance structure, she stated for the record. The minutes captured it. For the first time, record aligned. Nora did not attend the board meeting. She did not request acknowledgement. She received the draft minutes via Laura later that evening. She read the paragraph once, then closed the file. The narrator understands something Terry now accepts. Quietly, power does not always reside in voice. It resides in documentation preserved when others assume memory will suffice. The acquisition would proceed, not exactly as first envisioned. Liquidity reduced, escrow expanded, narrative amended, but integrity of record restored. Nora did not celebrate. She prepared for final mediation. because alignment once achieved on paper must still be formalized in signature. And she would sign only what was accurate, no more, no less. Resolution, when it finally approaches, rarely feels triumphant. It feels quiet. The revised acquisition agreement arrived in the form of a red-line document just under 200 pages long. Escrow percentages had shifted. Representation clauses expanded. Disclosure schedules included precise references to early governance history and pending marital settlement. Redcrest Capital had not withdrawn, but it had recalibrated. The billion-dollar headline number still existed in public-facing projections, yet internal payout models reflected holdbacks, contingencies, and structured distributions tied to final judicial approval. Terry reviewed the updated terms alone, before forwarding them to his counsel. The number he had once envisioned landing cleanly into his personal accounts now appeared segmented initial distribution, reduced escrow, delayed performance conditions attached. None of it catastrophic, but none of it unencumbered. Across the city in Avery Cole's office, Nora read the settlement draft carefully. The document did not name her as co-founder. It did not rewrite corporate history beyond documented governance acknowledgement. But it quantified equitable distribution based on contribution fiduciary authority and marital law. It reflected the personal guarantee she had signed. It accounted for deferred compensation adjustments. It incorporated Redcrest's revised escrow structure. It was not emotional. It was precise. Avery watched her client's expression. "This aligns with documented contribution," Avery said. "Yes," Nora replied. "No victory clause," Avery added. "No," Nora said quietly. "There would be no public statement, no apology required, no humiliation returned, only alignment." At Wallace Analytics, the board convened one final time before closing. Laura Chen addressed governance openly. For transparency, she said early structural authority held by Nora Long has been formally recognized within settlement documents. Disclosure obligations satisfied. One independent director spoke, "This should have been acknowledged earlier." Laura did not disagree. Terry remained silent during that portion of the meeting. Silence now felt different. After the call ended, Daniel Brooks approached him privately. "You built something extraordinary," Daniel said carefully. Terry nodded. "I know." "And she stabilized it when it mattered," Daniel added. Terry did not respond. The signing ceremony for the revised acquisition was scheduled in New York under reduced publicity. No celebratory press conference. No large stage. Redcrest preferred controlled execution. The morning of the signing, Terry stood in a conference room overlooking Midtown Manhattan. The skyline was steady beneath winter light. Lawyers arranged documents with quiet efficiency. He signed first. His signature moved steadily across the final page of the purchase agreement. Liquidity, even reduced, was imminent. Then escrow documents, then amended representation certifications. Each page acknowledged full disclosure. Each page reflected the months of scrutiny. Across town, in a smaller mediation room, Nora met with Terry and their respective counsel to finalize divorce settlement terms. The atmosphere was controlled but calm. A mediator reviewed provisions, equitable distribution, escrow allocation, release of personal guarantee upon acquisition closing, confidentiality terms, no disparagement clauses, mutual, not unilateral. Terry glanced at her occasionally. She did not avoid his gaze. When the mediator asked if both parties understood the terms, Nora nodded once. "Yes," she said. There was no tremor in her voice. Terry hesitated a fraction longer before responding. "Yes." Documents were passed. Signatures required. Nora read each page again before signing. Not out of distrust, out of habit. When her pen moved across the final signature line, it did not shake. The act was not revenge. It was conclusion. After signatures were exchanged, the mediator offered polite congratulations. Neither smiled broadly. Outside the building, the air was cold. Terry spoke first. "I never thought it would end this way," he said. "It didn't end," Nora replied evenly. "It changed." He studied her face. "You could have destroyed the deal," he said. I could have accused, she answered. I didn't. You wanted recognition. I wanted accuracy. He exhaled. I was wrong to minimize you. She did not respond immediately. Then quietly, documentation corrected it. There was no argument left, only acknowledgement. Redcrest wired the initial distribution within 48 hours of closing confirmation. Escrow funds were structured per revised agreement. Nora's equitable allocation transferred directly into accounts under her sole name. She did not make announcements. She did not schedule interviews. She did not attend celebratory dinners. Instead, she closed her Boston apartment lease and rented a smaller unit overlooking the harbor. Modest, quiet, independent. She arranged her notebooks neatly on a shelf near the window. 10 years of documentation, 10 years of structure, 10 years of silence. Terry appeared once in a financial publication following the acquisition. The article described the transaction as complex, but successfully navigated. It referenced governance revisions without elaboration. It did not mention Nora by name. But inside legal filings archived in court records, her role was preserved. Permanent. Laura Chen sent her a brief email weeks later. For what it's worth, the record is accurate now. Nora replied with a simple acknowledgement. No commentary, no bitterness. The narrator understands something neither press release nor public narrative conveys justice in corporate and marital intersections, does not roar. It recalibrates. Terry's reputation remained intact, though more tempered. Redcrest proceeded with integration plans. Wallace Analytics entered a new chapter under private equity oversight. And Nora began one of her own. She did not launch a rival firm. She did not write a memoir. She consulted quietly on governance and compliance for small startups who lacked structure in early stages. She charged fairly. She documented thoroughly. She never again signed without review. The final escrow release date arrived months later. Funds transferred per schedule. No further disputes arose. The court closed the case file. In her new apartment one evening, Nora opened her oldest notebook. On the first page was an entry dated nearly a decade earlier. Filed LLC registration tonight. 1:17 a.m. She flipped to the final page and wrote a single line beneath the last dated entry. Structure sustains what narrative forgets. She closed the notebook gently. There was no triumph, only steadiness. And for the first time in years, no pending disclosure deadline. The final mediation session was not dramatic. There were no raised voices, no last-minute revelations, no dramatic confessions, just paper. The room was smaller than the boardrooms where billion-dollar terms had been debated. Neutral walls, a long table, a pitcher of water placed between two stacks of documents. Nora Long arrived 5 minutes early. She wore a simple gray suit, her hair tied back the way she had worn it during depositions. A leather folder rested beneath her arm, not thick, not theatrical. Inside were copies of the final settlement draft escrow confirmation and release documentation regarding her personal guarantee. Across the table sat Terry Wallace. He looked composed. Tired, perhaps, but composed. Avery Cole arranged Nora's documents methodically. Terry's counsel mirrored the motion. The mediator reviewed the final terms aloud. Equitable distribution to be executed upon confirmation of acquisition closing. Escrow allocation, as previously amended. Mutual release of claims upon transfer. Removal of personal guarantee obligations tied to early corporate credit facility. Each clause carried the weight of months. When the mediator paused, she looked to Nora. Do you understand and accept the terms as written? Nora did not answer immediately. She opened the document again. She read the section referencing her early fiduciary authority. It was brief, only 2 sentences, acknowledging documented governance participation during formative years. 2 sentences, 10 years compressed into legal language. She read the escrow schedule carefully. The numbers matched revised projections. She verified the clause formally releasing her personal guarantee upon transaction completion. She closed the folder. Yes, she said. The word was steady. The mediator turned to Terry. And you? He hesitated longer. Yes. Pens were uncapped. Paper shifted softly across the table. Nora signed first. Her signature flowed smoothly, practiced, legible, controlled. She did not press hard. She did not hesitate. Then Terry signed. The mediator gathered the pages. "That concludes the agreement," she said. There was no applause, no ceremonial handshake, only conclusion. Outside the building, winter light reflected off glass towers. The city moved without acknowledgement of what had just resolved inside a modest conference room. Terry stepped toward Nora. "I never thought you'd fight," he said quietly. "I didn't fight," she replied. "You challenged everything. I verified everything." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "You always were meticulous." "Yes," she said. There was a pause. "I underestimated you," he admitted. Nora did not correct him. "You underestimated documentation," she said instead. He nodded once. For a moment there was something like clarity in his expression, not regret exactly, but recognition. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said. "I already have," she replied. They did not embrace. They did not exchange accusations. They walked in opposite directions. 2 days later, Redcrest confirmed final escrow deposit. The acquisition was complete. Press coverage was brief, technical, and measured. Complex transactions successfully finalized following governance clarifications. No mention of marital proceedings. No mention of personal guarantees. But within court records and disclosure schedules, Nora Long's role remained fixed. Permanent. In her new apartment overlooking the harbor, Nora arranged the last of her files into a small safe. Not because she anticipated further dispute, but because habit does not disappear with resolution. She opened her notebook, its pages worn slightly at the edges. On the final blank page, she wrote, "Documentation is memory that cannot be rewritten." She closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf beside the others. There was no music, no swelling orchestration, only quiet. Over the next weeks, she received polite inquiries from smaller firms seeking compliance consultation. Laura Chen had recommended her discreetly. Nora accepted selectively. She preferred companies in early stages, those balancing ambition with vulnerability. In her first consultation call, a young founder asked, "When should we start documenting governance properly?" Nora answered without hesitation, "Before you think you need to." The founder laughed lightly. She did not. Evenings were different now. No late-night board calls, no escrow modeling emails, no tense calendar overlaps between court hearings and acquisition milestones. She walked along the harbor some nights, hands in her coat pockets, watching ships move steadily across water that reflected nothing permanently. Freedom felt less like escape and more like stillness. There were moments when memories surfaced unexpectedly, the kitchen table in Somerville. The first funding wire confirmation, the early email from Terry that read, "Couldn't do this without you." She did not feel anger. She felt context. Context had been restored. Months later, the final escrow release transferred without incident. The court case officially closed. No further motions, no appeals. In the last email Avery Cole sent her there was only a brief sentence. "Your restraint made the difference." Nora read it once. She did not reply immediately. Then she typed, "Precision made the difference." Because it had. Not confrontation, not humiliation, not revenge. Precision. The narrator understands something that neither court transcripts nor financial reports can fully capture. Strength does not always present itself in argument. Sometimes it presents itself in patience, in quiet preparation, in refusal to sign inaccurately. Terry continued in his role under Redcrest oversight for a transitional period before stepping back from daily operations. Publicly, he remained respected. Privately, he had learned something about governance that no keynote speech would teach. Narrative alone cannot override record. As for Nora, she never once spoke publicly about the divorce. She never corrected articles. She never posted commentary. Her dignity did not require amplification. It required alignment. One evening, standing by her apartment window, as the sun dipped below the harbor, she felt something unfamiliar, not triumph, Relief? No pending signatures, no pending hearings, no pending disclosure deadlines, only space. She turned away from the window and reached for her notebook again, not to record litigation milestones, but to outline a compliance framework for a new client. The same methodical care, the same quiet precision. The story had not ended in humiliation. It had ended in documentation. And Nora Long walked forward, not as a silent partner, but as someone who understood that silence, when paired with record, carries its own authority. If this story stayed with you, let it sit for a moment. Not every injustice is loud. Not every correction is visible. Sometimes the most powerful response is the one that leaves the record intact. If you've ever seen silence mistaken for weakness, share where you're watching from and what time it is there. Justice, like truth, crosses time zones. And if stories about quiet strength and earned alignment resonate with you, you're welcome to stay. Subscribe if you'd like to follow more narratives where dignity speaks without shouting. Some endings don't echo, they settle.